Will Android devices ever be truly secure?
And does your home need a Mu-MIMO Wi-Fi traffic cop?
Welcome to Vertical Hold, the tech show where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm what's left of Alex Kidman, and I'm joined by a man who's already running Windows 11, Adam Turner. Adam, what's new in tech?
Australians look set to pay more for overseas purchases, with Joe Hockey throwing around different models for adding GST to overseas purchases. He's recently floated the idea of abolishing a minimum threshold completely, so even if you buy something from Amazon for $1, the tax man's still going to want his 10% slice of the action.
iiNet shareholders have voted in favour of the TPG takeover offer. Once finalised, the deal will see TPG leapfrog ahead of Optus to become Australia's number 2 ISP.
More than 1,000 artificial intelligence and robotics researchers have signed a petition calling for a complete ban on AI warfare, concerned that an artificial intelligence arms race could potentially wipe out humanity. Stephen Hawking and Steve Wozniak are amongst the signatories calling for a complete ban on totally autonomous smart weapons.
Apple's updated the iPod Touch line for the first time in 3 years, and here's one I prepared earlier. It's essentially an iPhone 6 without the phone bits. Same processor, same memory, although the screen is also lower resolution and still a bit smaller. They started around $279, and they're not a bad option if you didn't need the phone parts of an iPhone 6.
So, Alex, Joe Hockey thinks we can get rid of the GST threshold completely for overseas purchases. So you buy something from Amazon for $1 and you're still expected to pay GST on it. Is this practical? Can this work?
Look, Hockey seems to think that it can. Previous reports have suggested or indicated that there is a low threshold beneath which it's not really financially viable to collect it. Yeah. And that's part of what worries me with this. I mean, if I'm buying something for $1 off Amazon, is it going to massively inconvenience me that it costs $1.10? Probably not. Is there going to be more work in collecting that 10 cents? Yeah, there probably is. Not so much from an Amazon. The big players, your Amazons, your Netflixes, places like that, yeah, they can probably be compelled, and this seems to be what Hockey's suggesting, they can probably be compelled to collect it on the Australian government's behalf. Just when you sign in, they go, right, you're an Australian customer, the applicable tax is GST, therefore your purchase costs this much more. And maybe they're big enough and maybe there's enough scale that that will make sense and they'll just do it and go along with it because they view it as a cost of doing business. Equally speaking, though, for any new entrants, and of course Amazon is a good example here because they don't have a local retail interest. They sell ebooks under Amazon.com.au, but it's not like in the States where they sell just about everything. For a bigger entrant to have a look at the market, they might say, well, hang on, the cost of doing all that implementation and doing all that stuff means that Australia is not a viable market, so we might miss out on stuff. The bigger problem, of course, comes about when you're dealing with other smaller merchants, because either they're just not going to know that they've got to apply it, and then it falls presumably to customs to detect it and then to charge you as the receiver. Now, that introduces some interesting issues about how much you spend on that kind of detection technology, but also on how much of a delay on getting a package from overseas there might be. Equally, of course, it opens up all sorts of loopholes, because if someone, for example, if one of my relatives is sending me a gift from overseas that's a genuine gift, then they can't logistically charge GST on that. But how do you stop businesses from just saying, oh, well, this package that we're sending Mr. Turner is a gift?
I think there's also an opportunity here. There's already businesses run in Australia, like I think they're called Shop USA and Buy USA and stuff like that. And what they will do is they will send someone into a store in New York to buy the thing you want over the counter and then post
direct
it
shipping agents, yeah.
Now, they probably don't get as cheap a deal on shipping as Amazon does, but if they go in and buy it over the counter, assuming they buy it in the US state without sales tax, then they're saving the money. So those businesses will be crunching the numbers to see if they can get shipping costs low enough that it's worth going through them so you don't have to pay GST when you shop overseas.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, there are obvious issues with government revenue raising in Australia right now, and possibly lowering the threshold is not the worst idea in the world for dealing with this particular problem. I mean, possibly taking slightly fewer helicopter rides might also be a good step, but there's perhaps an argument for lowering it. Eliminating it completely, yeah, I don't see it being a great option.
So, Alex, there's a new Android vulnerability out there. It's, maybe who you want to ask, the latest in a long list. Should we be concerned this time?
Oh, definitely. Look, this particular bug, the Stagefright bug, as it's being dubbed at this point, is a particularly nasty little vulnerability that appears to be present in all versions of Android from 2.2 up to 5.1. Basically,
Ouch.
The vast majority of Android devices on the market are susceptible to it. And what makes it particularly nasty, it's called Stagefright because it takes advantage of a vulnerability in the video processing engine under Android. What makes it nasty is that amongst the ways it can be implemented includes sending an MMS message to a phone in order to execute remote code. And I mean, once you can execute remote code on a device, you can do all sorts of things. You can play around the memory. You can see people's photos. You can potentially run other applications and botnet stuff, and all the nasty, horrible things that you really want to avoid with a malware issue. With this one, you send someone an MMS. That's all you need to do. You actually only need to receive the MMS. You don't need to open it. There's no user activation. It's not like the dodgy Android market apps where you actually have to say, yes, I permit you to do all this stuff. No, you just have to be able to receive it. So you could be asleep and be compromised by this thing. What makes it particularly problematic and what worries me in this broader sphere is that the history of Android updates is not a great one. There's a few very minor league phones which apparently already hardened against it, and it seems most likely that Google will update the Nexus phones to cover that because they're pretty good at pushing out updates in a fairly timely manner. But every other Android handset out in the world, and that's some hundreds of millions of them, the vast majority of the smartphones on the market now are Android, are vulnerable, and they're going to remain vulnerable until updates are pushed out.
So it's quite possible that some of those devices will be vulnerable forever because they're never going to get an update, because vendors, if you're relying on your telco to approve an update, it just may not come for an older phone.
Exactly, and actually the other nasty thing here is it gets worse the further you go back. I think it's prior to version 4.2. The exploit can actually access a whole lot more of an Android device because of some of the stuff that's in 4.2 and above that makes it a little bit more sandboxed, a little bit more secure. And those devices just don't get updates. I mean, even with Android Lollipop, the most current version of Android, which came out late last year, the figures suggest that something like only about 12% of devices that could have updated have updated to Lollipop. And some of that's down to some users not updating, but the vast majority of it is because the telcos have to approve all this stuff and it just doesn't get pushed through in a timely fashion. If we're very lucky with this particular bug, it may be that either a workaround can be developed to deliver a small, over-the-air style bug fix. And I strongly suspect as well that the Android routing community will probably work on a fixed version of a lot of popular handset OSs to sidestep the issue. But then, of course, you've got to be able to root your phone. You've got to be interested in doing that. And the vast majority of consumers just aren't.
They just don't, So about now, I can hear all the Apple fanboys in the background going on about how Apple is so wonderful in this regard because Apple is the central repository for all updates. If something like this showed up on iOS, they'd fix it. They'd send out an update. Everybody, in theory, would be fixed. Is Android ever going to be able to match something like that?
I don't know that they're going to be able to match something like that. I don't know that the Android fans should, the Apple fans should particularly be resting on their laurels, because Apple doesn't have a great track record in security either. You've got multiple issues there because you've got the older Apple devices that simply don't get the new OS updates, and obviously if this kind of bug came out, exactly the same problem. Equally, Apple really doesn't talk about this stuff, and it's the kind of dichotomy of Android. Android's so amazingly open, so you can do all these wonderful different things that Apple will never let you do. But that openness means it's open to attack. And of course, like Windows, and because Android has this huge market spread, it's very attractive for people to write malware to attack. So it's under that much more attack. And I suppose this then comes down to the concept of, well, if you are running one of these older Android devices and you are particularly concerned, unfortunately, the likely solution is going to be to wait for an actual fix to current handsets, so to the new Nexuses or to the the next generation of Samsung Galaxy phones and the like, and pick up one of those. It's that unfortunate situation where perhaps the only security fix you've got is actually going to be new hardware. Now, Adam, Mu-MIMO sounds like something that my parents would have worn back in the 70s. at a fondue dipping party, but it's not that. Or at least I hope it's not that. What is it?
Well, basically, it's a newer version of the Wi-Fi standard, but it's not designed so much about speed boost. Usually, every new version of Wi-Fi, we go from G to N to AC. It's primarily about a speed boost. This is more about traffic management. So what it's designed to do is, traditionally on a Wi-Fi network, all your Wi-Fi gear gets in a line, gets served one at a time. With these new routers, when you've got compatible devices, they can basically form their own separate queue and all be served at once. So these devices get served faster, but even older devices that aren't compatible are still better off because the queue's now shorter. So in theory, every device on your home network gets served a little bit faster.
So is this a case where it'll be a firmware update for an existing router, or we all need to go out and buy new routers?
No, it's going to be new routers. It's going to be the next generation of routers. We've seen there's a Linksys one floating around it now that it's, I think, the first one in Australia. I wouldn't be surprised if the next Airport Extreme has it. Basically, this is generation 2 of 802.11 AC. The last Airport Extreme, which is 2 years old, does AC but doesn't do this multi-user MIMO. So over the next 12 months, we'll probably see quite a few of them. But to get the most out of it, your end devices also have to support it. And even now, you might have a tablet or a smartphone that supports 802.11 AC, but it's very unlikely that it actually does this multi-user MIMO. So it's going to be 2 or 3 years before we really see the most benefit from this. But even if you've got no gear that supports that today, you're still likely to see a bit of a speed boost and a bit of a range boost from what I've seen testing it, that you will notice a difference, but it will get better over time as more gear works with it.
Right, I mean, I'm always a bit wary with new standards for Wi-Fi because they tend to trickle through very slowly, and as you said, we're talking like 2 to 3 years before you start having gear that's really going to maximize this out. As such, should we be getting excited right now, or should we just say, nah, Linksys, all the rest of it? You know, nice that you've got this new nice gear out there, but I'll wait 2 or 3 years till actually everything is finished, standardized, and there's lots of gear around?
As far as I know, the standard is not locked in. This is not like we used to see with G and N, and you see your pre-standard stuff where every vendor would come up with their own thing and it would never work nicely with anybody else. This is the finished standard, and there are others coming. But I wouldn't necessarily rush out and buy one today if you're happy with the gear that you've got.
Well, that just about wraps it up for another episode of Vertical Hold. If you've got any comments, leave them on our YouTube page, our Facebook page, or hit us up over Twitter.
Thanks for joining us. Remember, if you like what you see, hit that subscribe button.